unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello everyone and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty. 48 days to go until the showdown with communism right within our own borders. Well, what's left of them anyway. Joining us today to talk about communism is Steven Mosher, a longtime partner in the struggle against godless Marxism. I'm your host, Gary Michael Voris. Good morning, Steven. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
You too. You too. For the audience, why don't you reacquaint people with why you are an expert on the topic of global communism? It is really kind of quite the story. Just give people your background.
Well, I was the first American social scientist allowed to go to China and do in-depth research since the Communist Revolution in 1949. At that point, a bamboo curtain fell down, dividing China from the rest of the world. That lifted in 1979. I was on the ground in China in March of 1979, living in a Chinese commune. It was actually called Junan Commune, Equality Commune, mind you. there was no equality. There was no equality in Equality Commune. The cadres feasted, living high on the hog, and the ordinary people ate what they called black rice. It was broken rice. It was the leavings after they had to give the best to the party to consume. So I spent a year in China, went back frequently. I can speak, read, and write Chinese. And I was there when the one-child policy began. I was there in March of 1980 when the Chinese Communist Party said, we are declaring second and third and fourth children to be illegal. Unborn children, for the first time in history, were declared to be enemies of the state, enemies of progress, enemies of the Chinese Communist Party. And I had friends of mine who were arrested for the crime of being pregnant. The crime of being pregnant, it hadn't been a crime a few months before, of course. Now it was suddenly declared by the Chinese Communist Party to be a crime without permission. If you're pregnant without the permission of the party, you are committing a crime. They were arrested. They were locked up in concentration camps. They were subjected to propaganda sessions, brainwashing sessions. And at the end of the day, all these young women, and they were mostly in their early 20s, mid-20s, were taken under escort, in some cases by outright force, to the local medical center where they were forced down on operating tables and aborted by cesarean section abortions. Their babies were being killed by lethal injection, and they were opened up like tin cans by cesarean sections, and their now dead and dying babies were removed. I was in the operating room when they were doing these things. I took pictures of these crimes against humanity. And of course, it wasn't just the one-child policy, as gruesome as that was. I was also taken out to the local killing fields where they had executed landlords and businessmen and anyone associated with the nationalist government, anyone who spoke out against the Communist Party. I was taken out to the mass burial grounds where hundreds of villagers were buried after the famine that broke across China after the Great Leap Forward, when 45 million Chinese died. So I was given a view of China by ordinary Chinese that I guarantee you that the Democrat vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, was not allowed to see, because Tim, God bless him, spent all of his time with party officials, being wined and dined by party officials, being feasted at banquets, being given gifts, and being told lies about the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, can I ask you, because your viewers are probably saying, how did you get this kind of access? I mean, why would they want a Westerner taking pictures and reporting on all of this when it's the very thing they're trying to hide? How did you have such access and such license around the country?
Well, it was, looking back, Michael, I think it was providential, because initially we had signed, the U.S. and China had signed a scholarly exchange agreement under the terms of which 50 American scholars were going to be allowed into China to do research, and thousands of Chinese were going to be allowed to come here and study at our universities. You see how balanced the program was.
Yeah. Thousands, 50.
Thousands, now tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands. So we were limited to 50. And I was the only social scientist. The rest of them were nuclear physicists and chemical engineers, and the kind of people in technology and science that the Chinese Communist Party was desperate to get their hands on in order to pick their brains and enable China to get do a great leap forward in technology. I was the only social scientist, and guess what? The Chinese side turned down my research proposal, and it was only because of the intervention of then President Jimmy Carter, not my favorite president, right. But Jimmy Carter had a meeting with China's senior leader, Deng Xiaoping, and he said, what about Steven Mosher? You know, we have this Stanford University researcher we'd like to send to China to see how life has improved under your rule. And Deng Xiaoping, who wanted the other 49 scholars, who wanted American technology, who wanted American investment, who wanted access to American markets, said, oh, it won't be a problem. Well, guess what? When China's dictator says something won't be a problem, it generally isn't a problem. All of the problems disappear. And so I went into this commune. And I know that when I was in the operating room and witnessing these crimes against humanity, the killing of innocent children near birth, in some cases after birth, I know that an official went running to the commune headquarters and said, the foreign devil is in the operating room. And the chairman of the local party committee said, there's nothing we can do. He has permission from Deng Xiaoping to be there. So it was providential, Michael. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this kind of evidence that I brought back from China in 1981, and that led to hundreds of millions of dollars in funding cuts to the UN Population Fund, to name just one victory we were able to achieve.
Sure. Now there's as if that's not personal enough, there's an interiorly personal story that happened to you as a result of seeing all of this. Tell the audience about that as well.
Well, you know, I had been at Stanford University. And so naturally, I had absorbed the views of the radical materialist and the radical narcissist at the university. I had lost my childhood faith. I had taken the pro-life issue to be something that was not a concern of mine as a young man. That's a very convenient position to take. And there I was in the operating room seeing friends of mine being forcibly aborted at children that they had conceived in love and were very close to giving birth to. And it was clearly a violation of their rights. And then I saw the innocent daughters of Eve, the sons of Adam, who were being killed. Death warrants had been issued for them by the Chinese Communist Party, and their lives were being taken. I instantly became pro-life because I realized for the first time the horror of abortion, the taking of an innocent human life. And I've been pro-life ever since. And I also, you know, it was strange, but I encountered a great evil. And you might say, well, how can encountering evil lead you back to God? Well, it can, because there are millions or tens of millions of young people in this country who have been propagandized into believing that there is no absolute evil. There is no absolute good. Everything is shades of gray. Everything is relative. Moral relativism, situational ethics. What's right in one case may be wrong in another. Well, I encountered an absolute evil. It was as if the pit of hell had opened up before me. No greater evil than the killing of innocent unborn children. And I recoiled from that evil and began to seek the good. You see, because if such a great evil could exist, either there was a God or the universe was mad. And I didn't want to live in an insane asylum. And so I began to seek the good, and all good comes from God. And so I eventually wound up a few years later. I'm a slow learner when it comes to some very important things. I entered the Catholic Church on a beautiful Easter Sunday in April of 1991. So I found my way home. And I have to believe as a Catholic that in the communion of saints, because I think that the little children whose deaths I witnessed in China were pleading for the throne of God for my conversion. I was working in a very weak human way on their behalf, trying to save women and babies in China. They were working in a very powerful supernatural way before the throne of God to help get me home to heaven.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm choking up over that. Hadn't thought of it like that. You've written quite a few books, and I've actually interviewed you in the past life on a number of them, but you've got a new one out. Why did you write it? And if there is one takeaway from this book, what would you want people to know?
Well, I've been disturbed, as I know you are, over the last a couple decades at the degradation of American civil discourse, at the forgetting of the founding documents of our country, the Declaration of the Constitution, their degradation, of the loss of morals and values in our country, not just because of rampant abortion, but because of the dissolution of the family. And I've been very disturbed that people on the progressive side of the equation have gone full-blown Marxist, in my view. Look, I was at Stanford University. One of my colleagues at Stanford was Donald Harris. He was a Marxist professor in the economics department, and he's Kamala Harris's dad. So she clearly is a red diaper baby. And Tim Walz and I, we're both have something in common. We both went to China. We both speak Chinese. But I talked to ordinary people, and they told me about the crimes that had been committed against them. He spent his time with party officials who told him that China was a wonderful place. The party provides free food and free housing to everyone in China. No, they don't. It's all a fabrication. But even today, Tim Walz says things like, China's not an adversary. And you sort of want to put your hand on his shoulder and say, Tim, wake up. China declared in May of 2019 that they are in a people's war against the United States. What's a people's war? A people's war is when you use all the means at your disposal to weaken and corrupt and divide your enemy. You send fentanyl across the border. You send agents across the southern border. You attack them in cyberspace. You engage in gray zone warfare in the South China Sea and against Taiwan. So that's what's going on. And so I wrote the book to wake up Americans to the danger of communist China, but also as an object lesson in how easy and how close we are to sliding into the same form of government ourselves. We have open Marxists, in my view, now as the leading candidates of one of the two political parties in the United States. And I find it hard to sleep at night thinking about the fact that our future might be China's present.
Yeah, true that. It's hard to sleep at night. Absolutely. I don't know how you couldn't have your rest and sleep disturbed looking at a very real possibility at this moment. We were saying, before we started the show, you and I talking, and it's just like, I can't believe you and I are, grew up in the same generation, are sitting having this conversation about the potential end of America. It's very frightening. Before we go on, I just want to take a moment and say to the viewers, if you like this kind of discussion, if you like the idea of these sorts of things being aired out in a good, discourse and a sharing of ideas and learning something and everything, please just hit that donate button and help support everything that we're doing here. These kinds of conversations are absolutely necessary. And I'll tell you, and I think we all know this, these kinds of conversations won't be allowed to happen if the communists win. Sooner or later, they'll come around. They've already said it. I mean, Tim Walz is on record, saying, misinformation, shouldn't be allowed. He doesn't enjoy a First Amendment right. First of all, he's wrong. Second of all, who gets to decide what's misinformation? Well, if they're in charge, they do. They'll come after Elon. They'll shut down Twitter. I mean, they've never said all of this stuff. This is no big shock or great prophecy. They've already said it. So we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure the message keeps getting out, to keep saying, this is the truth. This is what the reality is. And you say it as much as you can, as frequently as you can, whatever your circumstances are. And today, our circumstances are, we still have a relatively free internet, at least on X and on our website, Souls and Liberty. So if you are able to help support us, please do. Steven, I want to shift for a moment and talk about communism's struggle with religion, specifically Catholicism. Lots of people will go on and say, it's economics, and communism isn't Marxism, blah, 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 and it's different economic policy, what you're talking about and everything else. And all of that, while there are some little differences you could probably concentrate on if you were way down in the weeds kind of guy, that's not the big picture. Big picture is communism versus religion, specifically Catholicism. Your thoughts?
Well, basically, at the heart of communism, underlying all of its, economic pretensions and all of its cultural pretensions, is a hatred of God. is the rejection of God. Communism is an effort to establish heaven on earth. And of course, in the effort to establish heaven on earth, they propagate the fantasy that if you simply give us power, that one day we will simply give it up, that one day the government will simply fade away and we will all be equal forever. That fantasy was enough to lead enough people in Russia into following Lenin, that he launched the most brutal and long-lasting communist regime in history. That fantasy was used by Chairman Mao Zedong to deceive enough Chinese villagers into following him, that he put in place a regime that over the course of its deadly history has probably killed 100 million people, adults, and another 400 million unborn children. 100 million adults in various purges and persecutions. The land reform, 10 million landlords, rich peasants were executed. The nationalists were killed in large number. The Cultural Revolution, millions more died. The Great Famine after the Great Leap Forward, 45 million people died. And then, of course, the biggest blunder in social engineering in human history, the one-child policy we talked about, began in 1980, ran through 2016. 400 million unborn and newborn victims of the one-child policy. So add those numbers together, it's a truly staggering death toll. 500 million people have died at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, which I call the biggest killing machine in human history. And communism always kills. Sometimes it kills slowly, sometimes it kills quickly, but it's a kind of death cult, and it's a quasi-religious organization. It purports to be all things to all people, and in that formulation, there is no place for God. And so communist leaders like Xi Jinping, like Mao Zedong before him, hated religion. Mao said that Catholic missionaries in China were Nazis. He called them terrorists. And the communists began killing Catholic missionaries. The first Catholic missionary to die at the hands of the communists died in 1929, and many, many more followed in the years after that. So of all the religions in China, Catholicism is the only one where the leader of the religion is outside of China and runs a sovereign state, the Vatican.
Right.
And so there is an extra level of threat, I think, perceived by the Chinese Communist Party towards Catholics, because while Protestants are broken up into thousands of different sects and can be controlled, while Tibetan Buddhists are within the borders of China and Tibetan Buddhism is being slowly crushed, while the Muslim Uyghurs in the West can be controlled and their mosques can be torn down, Catholics have a kind of allegiance to what the Chinese Communist Party regards as a foreign entity, not just God, which in their view is bad enough, but to the Pope himself. And so Chinese Catholics have always been doubly persecuted. Now, everyone's being persecuted in China right now. Xi Jinping wants to stamp out all religions, make no mistake. He wants to stamp out Mongolian Buddhism. He wants to stamp out the Uyghurs. He wants to stamp out the Tibetan Buddhists, the Protestants. But Catholics, they reserve particular rancor for Catholics because they regard them as disloyal to the state. And the state should be all things to all people in the view of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party runs a kind of Church of China, church in quotes, where the people are supposed to sit in the pews and listen to the supreme leader, Xi Jinping, and do his will. And the acolytes in the church are the members of the Chinese Communist Party. And they don't want any other religions operating freely in China, especially Catholics.
Is there a challenge then to try to understand what was going on with those Vatican/China accords set up, negotiated, I suppose, by Theodore McCarrick, disgraced former cardinal, sex abuser, every other thing you can think of, and on behalf of Cardinal Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State. What's behind that as far as you know? I mean, clearly, I mean, McCarrick you can't trust as far as you can throw him, but why on earth would the Vatican offer up Chinese Catholics the way they did? What's going on there? Just your insights. You don't necessarily have to have all kinds of proof and put the receipts out, but you've been involved in all of this for decades, and your insights are going to be more valuable than practically everybody on earth. So what do you think?
Well, I was actually invited in June of 2018, before the Sino-Vatican Agreement was signed, to the Vatican by Cardinal Parolin. I sat down and met with the Cardinal Secretary of State, and he talked to me about the proposed agreement. And I told him, Michael, it was a very bad idea, because the Chinese Communist Party would violate any agreement that was signed before the ink was dry on the paper. I recounted the history of the Chinese Communist Party violating every international agreement it had ever signed. I said any agreement will be used not to serve to create a safe space for Catholics in China, but actually will be used to destroy the Catholic Church in China. And I got all done with my presentation, and I didn't hold back. I mean, we had an hour together, and to his credit, he listened. And then my heart sank, because he said, well, the agreement's already been negotiated. We're just waiting for the Chinese side to come over and sign. Okay. So that was 2018, signed in September of 2018, renewed in 2020 and 2022. I think it's going to be renewed again shortly.
Let me ask you, Stephen, interrupt you for a moment, please. When he said that to you, I mean, yeah, your reaction is like, what? But did you say something back to him? Did he just dismiss? What was the point of even meeting with you to begin with? He's just trying to get an ally in the field, and if you went against him, he just didn't care. I mean, the constant shenanigans going on with that crowd is repulsive to the Catholic soul, to the Catholic spirit. And are they just ignorant? Are they in on something? Is this part of the $2 billion a year that an atheist Italian hedge fund guy said, yeah, we've been tracking this money, $2 billion a year flows to the Vatican from China through all these different things. And is that what's going on? What is this?
Well, first of all, when the question of money changing hands came up, I called my friend Cardinal George Pell, whom I've known since he was the Archbishop of Melbourne many years ago, and now deceased. We lost him, sadly, in strange circumstances in Rome a couple of years ago. And Cardinal Pell, who had been in charge of looking into the finances of the Vatican, tangled web if there ever was one, said to me, he said, there's no evidence of such a payment in the official Vatican finance records, he said, but I had no access to private accounts and private records. So he said I couldn't rule out the possibility of any payment. And note that the great Cardinal Pell did not say, oh, absolutely not. No one would ever do that.
Right.
He did not dismiss the possibility. But I have to go back to the agreement for just a second, because in my view, watching this thing unfold for the last 6 years, clearly the so-called agreement has been a disaster. But I would say this, that the agreement was never signed by the Chinese side. And I say that because last year there was a Bishop Sher appointed to be the Bishop of Shanghai without consulting the Vatican. And when Cardinal Parolin was asked about the agreement and why the agreement was still secret, remember, the agreement's secret. We can't see the agreement.
Correct.
Right? The
Still,
agreement is never been released. When he was asked last year, why can't we see the agreement? Cardinal Parolin let something slip. He said, well, the agreement is a work in progress. We're still, it's a working document. We're still working out the details. They don't have an agreement. What they have on the part of the Vatican is the hope that if they bow and scrape and kowtow and concede and show tolerance and towards the Chinese Communist Party, that the Chinese Communist Party will one day reciprocate. I can guarantee you that it's never going to happen. You can make concession after concession after concession to the Chinese Communist Party, and they will just regard you as fools.
right.
And I have to go back now at this point to 1995. I met with the papal nuncio in Hong Kong. At the time, and now he's Cardinal Filoni. At the time, he was Monsignor Filoni. He was based in Hong Kong, but he was the unofficial nuncio to China. No diplomatic relations, so he couldn't be in Beijing. He had to be in Hong Kong, which was then still a British colony. And I asked him about the church in China, and he said, the church in China is united. And I said, what do you mean, Monsignor? He said, well, all the bishops of China, regardless of whether they were appointed by the Pope or appointed by the Communist Party, have come to us and asked to be recognized as legitimate bishops. And he said, after conducting investigations, we have recognized them all, except for the Bishop of Shanghai and the Bishop of Beijing, the capital city, and Shanghai, the major economic city. He said, we haven't recognized those two because they've made too many compromises with the Chinese Communist Party. But he smiled and said, the church is united. It is one universe. He was very happy about that. What's happened since is a step backward, a huge step backward. When Xi Jinping took power in 2012, he was determined to stamp out all religion in China except the quasi-religion that is the communist cult. And he has set about doing that. He gave a speech in which he said, the only religious organizations that are going to be allowed to survive in China are those that serve the party, that adhere to the party line, and that teach respect for the party leaders. In other words, worship me, and I'll let you keep the lights on in your church.
So what is it, if not money, what is it that's the motivating factor here for the Vatican to, accept all of this and operate under the hope that something's going to happen? I mean, I don't know we don't even know what the something is supposed to be, but what's the motivation for this? I mean, $2 billion a year sure seems to me to be a lot of motivation. But let's assume none of that is true. What would otherwise be the motivation?
Well, I'm sure you know that that Theodore McCarrick, now laicized, former secretary, released the correspondence that he was helping McCarrick with in the Vatican some years ago, posted it online. And one of the letters that then Cardinal McCarrick sent to Pope Francis said that I'm going to China for you, and I hope to fulfill the ancient dream of Matteo Ricci, the great missionary to China of centuries past, Matteo Ricci. I hope to fulfill the ancient dream of Matteo Ricci and bring you China. Imagine the hubris in that statement. McCarrick said, I'm going to bring you China. Well, obviously, Pope Francis is very interested in China and wants to go to China. And I don't think he'll ever be allowed to go to China, quite frankly. But perhaps there are illusions there about socialism not being very bad. Perhaps there are illusions about communism gradually evolving into something more humane and less brutal. And,
wow, you talk about a level of ignorance that staggers the mind, seriously. I mean, a well-educated sophomore in high school would understand that's crap.
Oh, when in our day, when we still taught civics in high school, they would. I'm not sure that sophomores in high school can even read these days.
I should say homeschooled high schoolers.
We homeschool all of our children.
Sure.
They're not. So back to the people in the Vatican have said very bizarre things about China over the years. Bishop Sanchez, who was formerly the head of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences and Sciences, went to China and came back talking about how China was the best example of the institution of the social gospel in the world today. I met with him for 4 hours, and by the end of that 4 hours, I guarantee you that he realized his error. But I think he was just speaking in the same way that McCarrick was speaking, trying to get on Pope Francis's good side, trying to get his ear, understanding that Pope Francis had a sympathy for these kinds of regimes.
Yeah, he certainly does. Steven, tell us the name of your book and where people can get it, please.
The book is called The Devil and Communist China, and they can get it, I think, through your website and through our website as well at pop.org. And if I have just a second, Mao was consecrated as a young man to a demonic spirit by his mother and given a new name. And I think that's in the book, and I think that goes a long way to explaining why I called it The Devil and Communist China.
Yeah, we're going to use that as a tease for people to get the book. Before we leave, I was going to say thanks very much. We'll wrap it up. But before we leave, given all of this, not just China, obviously, but the seeds of evil in China that we see all over the U.S. now. I'd like to get your thoughts on the election and how you see it playing out and what the eventual outcome signifies. Either way.
Well, I think we're standing on a precipice. I think that the one of our major political parties is now in the hands of, you can call them leftists, you can call them progressives. I think they're clearly cultural Marxists. I think they believe that whatever advances the revolution, as Lenin said, is ethical. And they're doing everything they can in their power to not only win the election, but if they win the election, they will do everything in their power to pack the Supreme Court and seize and hold power forever. I think that in many respects, Tim Walz, we know, admires the Chinese system of governance. And in many ways, as the governor of Minnesota during the COVID lockdowns, emulated China in the lockdowns, emulated China in passing a law which allows men to force women to get abortions without punishment. I could go on, but I see these people as dangerous left-wing ideologues. And for them, at the end of the day, without belief in God, without belief in the hereafter, they're totally focused on seizing and holding power in the here and now, which would mean the end of the experiment in ordered liberty that we've enjoyed in America for the last 2.5 centuries. And for the sake of my 9 children and 14 and counting grandchildren, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. It's horrible. I've said in a number of talks I've given that, as the Roman Empire collapsed, if you add up the years of the Republic, roughly 500 years, and then 500 years roughly of the empire, you think of Roman civilization's 1,000 years. There was a last generation. There was a last generation who, 25-year-old, 30-year-old young men and women, who had lived on the fumes of the glory of Rome for 1,000 years. All of a sudden get up on one morning, because it did happen one morning, and got up and look out their doors, and here come the barbarians marching down the street. And so much for the glory of Rome. We sure hope that's not what's going on here, but I think you'd be immature and naive and foolhardy to consider that that's not a very real possibility as we sit here today. Steven Mosher, thank you very much for joining us. All of it. Just tremendous insights, great stuff. Knew it would be. That's why we had you on the show. Thank you. And one more time, give a plug for your book, name, and where they can get it.
The book is The Devil and Communist China. And the book is available from us at Population Research Institute. Our website is pop.org, pop.org.
And of course, we have it here at Souls and Liberty as well. Thank you so much once again, very much, Steven. Good seeing you again, and keeping the fight, brother, as we all know. Thank you. Before we leave you today, just a little closing thought. If you don't realize the stakes that we are fighting for right now, then it's probably too late for you. I'll give you a little piece of information from just this morning. A poll was released this morning, actually just a couple hours ago, that said 28% of Americans, 28%, between a quarter and a third of Americans, were sorry that either one of the assassins didn't actually kill Trump. Now, when you boil this down and you look at, well, this is, roughly 47-ish% of the country, is either at least hating on Trump, backing Kamala, whatever you want to say it. They're on that side of the fence for whatever their motives are. When you're talking about 28% of the country, and you're talking about that's roughly half the country, you're talking about over half of their supporters want to see Trump assassinated. That is a contingent headed up by the diabolical. And it's just that simple. Who we're fighting here is the devil, with his proxies and his people here on earth, because the devil, by his nature, can't physically control the universe and get into people's minds and take over their will, but he can heavily influence them. And what else? How else would you explain what's going on with a million children being killed by abortion, every year, and then all of the rest of it, the sex trafficking and all the stuff that's coming about, for example, about P. Diddy, all of it is an empire of evil. And that's why they are fighting back so desperately. That's why over half of them would be happy, and that's the ones who admitted it, happy to see Trump assassinated. Why? Is it because Trump's a paragon of virtue? No. It's because he represents something other than their worldview. Is it a perfect worldview? Absolutely not. If you're a Catholic or a patriotic Christian who looks over on the Trump side, there's a lot of work that needs to be done over there. Please God, we get the opportunity to do it after the election. If we don't, well, then it's essentially lights out. Done. Drop the curtain. It's over. It's just a matter of time until Kamala and the gang start checking every single social media site and the whole bit and everything else. They already were doing that during COVID. What are we fighting for here? We're fighting for a chance, a last gasp to come back and say, we need to reestablish solid natural law virtues, natural law, and express those through goodwill and the natural virtues that built Western civilization as enunciated by the Catholic Church. That is the only turnaround that would be acceptable if we're given an opportunity for a turnaround. We won't know that for another 48 days, maybe 2 or 3 days after that, because of course they'll be cheating and counting ballots and, we just found 500 million ballots inside a closet and all that. Once all that's done, once the dust is settled one way or the other, we're going to know. And if we are given that chance to fight for our children and our grandchildren and preserve something, you ain't seen a war like what would happen after a Trump victory. You think this is tough? You think you have sleepless nights now? Just wait. It is a call to arms. We're calling on heaven to intercede, not for a Trump win, but for what a Trump win would give us the opportunity for. That's what we're fighting for. That's all I got for you today. God love you. I'm Gary Michael Boris.